Hey beautiful, have you considered subscribing to our channel? It helps us make quality content for you. Help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers.
Drixal adjusted the filtration slits on his respirator, the taste of ozone and sterilized data lingering in the recycled air of the archives chamber. His bioluminescent eyes, a deep cyan, flicked rapidly over the decrypted Terran document, splayed across the holoscreen. At first he thought it was a mistranslation. The gravity readings alone were absurd, 9.8 meters per second squared, and yet these bipedal mammals called it moderate. He leaned closer, scanning through a human military training protocol titled Phase 2, Subarctic Conditioning in Kamchatka Zone. Wind speeds 70 kilometers per hour. Temperature 42 Celsius. Wildlife Threat Index 7.3. Expected mortality low, provided recruits adhere to basic survival protocol. He reread that last line. Low mortality. On a planet segment that would rupture the blood vessels of a Zentari within minutes, there had to be an error. Drixal extended his digits, their silvery skin twitching with unease as he pulled up atmospheric data on Kamchatka from the Terran Historical Consortium. Everything matched. Not only had humans trained in such places, but they'd done so voluntarily, for generations. He initiated a cross-species comparison algorithm, loading similar terrain models used in Dominion military academies. On any other planet, that level of environmental hostility would require full exosuits, genetic augmentations, and orbital rescue protocols. For humans, they wore layers of animal hide, carried steel blades, and laughed while they ran uphill through snowstorms. The Zentari. Scientists recoiled slightly as a video began to play. Archival footage from the pre-FTL Earth era. Young humans barely past puberty, hauling weighted sleds through white-out blizzards. One slipped, slid down a slope, dislocated a shoulder, and continued without breaking pace. The others merely jeered in encouragement. No one stopped. Drixal paused the video, disturbed. Not by the event itself. He had dissected corpses before, had seen war zones and pestilence. What unnerved him was the joy on their faces. These creatures weren't merely enduring the torment, they sought it. He pinged his assistant, a drone named Krivak, to compile an extended list of human training sites. It returned with dozens of names: Death Valley, Atacama, the Darvaza Crater, Mount Everest, and Black Rock Prime. An exoplanet where Earth's elite now trained in atmosphere-toxic lava plains. Black Rock is classified as a Class 7 hostile environment, Drixal muttered aloud, the words sour in his mandibles. No sentient life should persist there for more than 20 minutes without full shielding. The humans sent children. He leaned back in his pod chair, the curvature cradling his segmented spine, but no comfort came. A creeping anxiety, an alien emotion for one of his species, began to form. For centuries, the galactic consensus had been clear. Earth was a statistical anomaly, a planet that had inexplicably spawned a sapient predator species. But it was spoken of in the way one referenced a bad storm or a volatile gas giant, unpleasant but avoidable. Yet the more he read, the more Drixal saw that Earth's danger wasn't an accident of geography or weather. It was deliberate, crafted, used as a crucible. A ping echoed through his neural comm. It was a forwarded report from the Dominion's Interrogation Bureau, an alien prisoner debrief, obtained after a failed skirmish near the Terran frontier. The subject described an ambush. 4 humans, outnumbered and undersupplied, had held back a squad of 16 elite Rosari for 4 hours. Not with technology, not even with strategy, sheer stubborn refusal to die. They screamed as they charged, the Rosari had said, her voice trembling even in the recording. One of them was on fire. Drixal closed the file. There was nothing in his academic training that accounted for this. Zentari doctrine taught that evolution bred intelligence, and intelligence bred caution. But humans? They had turned their world's dangers into sport. They had trained their young on terrain that cracked armor. The scientist pulled up a physiological diagram. Carbon-based, dual-lunged, no armor plating and notoriously fragile joints. No natural weapons beyond primitive claws and incisors. Nothing should have made them exceptional. They should have been prey. Instead, they had become the galaxy's predators. Drixal rose slowly, joints clicking, and moved to the observation deck of the research vessel. Through the reinforced crystal, Earth hung in space, green, blue, and white like a serene marble. Nothing in its appearance betrayed the truth of it. Not the volcanic rift zones, the shifting tectonics, the chaotic weather patterns, or the apex predators still roaming wild. He recalled the first time he'd seen a Terran newsfeed, a segment called World's Toughest Mudder. He'd laughed then, assuming it was parody. Now he understood. It wasn't parody, it was prophecy. The humans didn't just survive adversity. They made it a rite of passage. Behind him, Krivak hovered silently, its optic lenses flickering. "Doctor," it said in its synthetic whisper, "shall I forward this research to the Dominion Council?" Drixal didn't answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the swirling clouds of Earth, on the very death world that had bred. A species whose idea of rest was climbing frozen mountains with bleeding hands. "No," he said at last. "Not yet. They wouldn't understand. They'd mock it like I did." He turned back to his console and began encrypting his findings into a private log, one not connected to any network, one that no one would see until it was too late. If what he'd uncovered was true, and all evidence pointed that way, then the galaxy wasn't prepared for humans. He wasn't sure anyone could be. Larik adjusted the pressure seal on his collar for the third time in as many minutes. The Terran atmosphere wasn't toxic, technically, but it was dense and gritty in a way that made his second lungs swell uncomfortably. The air tasted like metal and rain. Still, he was determined to endure. He was one of only 8 Tularian cadets selected for the observation exchange program, and this was his first rotation on a human outpost. The moment he stepped out of the decontamination gate, he regretted volunteering. Wind screamed across the blackened plateau, carrying stinging particulates that pinged off his ocular shield. The gravity was heavier than projected. Each footfall pulled at his joints with irritating insistence. But what truly froze him in place wasn't the climate. It was the humans. Down in the training trench, a dozen Terran recruits were sprinting, across terrain that looked like a battlefield after a bombardment. Cracked basalt, intermittent fire vents, and spiked flora that hissed when touched. Their bodies were coated in dust, their skin soaked in sweat and streaked with bruises. They moved like predators at full tilt. Larik blinked twice and initiated a recording sequence. He had read the dossiers, watched simulations, and attended dozens of interspecies briefings, but none of it had prepared him for the reality of human training. The commanding officer, a female with a gravelly voice and a face like weathered stone, shouted something unintelligible. The nearest trainee stumbled, landing face first into a jagged rock. Blood welled from his temple. Larik stepped forward instinctively, reaching for his emergency medical beacon. But no one stopped. The injured human let out a sharp bark, a laugh, and forced himself upright, waving off the others. Then he kept running, limping slightly, teeth bared in what Larik initially mistook for pain. It wasn't. It was something else. Something gleeful. A shadow fell across him. Sergeant Harlan, the ranking officer on site, loomed nearby, arms folded. His skin was the color of scorched tree bark, and the veins on his arms bulged like living cables. "You all right, cadet?" the man asked without preamble. His voice had a weight that didn't come from volume. Larik straightened reflexively. "Yes, Sergeant. Observing only," Harlan grunted. "They're pushing limits today, storms coming in fast, so we're accelerating the heat drills." Larik looked up. The sky had indeed darkened. Viscous black clouds churned overhead, threaded with pulses of green lightning. His suit sensors shrieked a silent warning. Extreme static buildup, shouldn't they? "Evacuate." Harlan turned his head slowly, the motion deliberate. "Evacuate? Hell no, this is what they train for, cadet. You think you learn anything by running when things get tough?" Larik opened his mouth, then closed it. He didn't have an answer that wouldn't sound foolish. The storm broke minutes later. Wind roared through the canyon, slamming against the observation platform. Rain followed, thick, greasy, and acidic enough to make Larik's exposed antennae retract. In alarms blared within his helmet. He turned to find shelter, only to stumble off the edge of the grated path, his boot catching on an exposed cable. He tumbled, limbs flailing, and landed hard among the outer rings of the obstacle field. Pain exploded across his ribcage. One of his filtration vents had crumpled, and his visor was now cracked. Panic set in. The air was wrong, the ground too sharp, the heat rising too quickly. His limbs refused to obey fully. He tried to crawl to activate his emergency signal, but the acid rain made his fingers slick and numb. Then, through the haze, came footsteps. Heavy, steady. A human approached, one of the trainees. His helmet was off, his face streaked with soot and mud, eyes alight with manic energy. He crouched beside Larik and grinned. "Well," the human said, voice amused, "you're not supposed to be down here, partner." Larik tried to respond, but his vocal cords seized. "Breathe shallow," the human advised. "This air'll rip your insides open if you panic." He slung Larik over one shoulder like a sack of grain and started jogging back toward the platform, through fire and wind and acidic rain. Each step jolted Larik's aching frame. Every few seconds he heard the human chuckle. "You aliens always think we're nuts, maybe we are." By the time they reached shelter, Larik's suit was ruined. His breath rasped. Harlan appeared again, calm and unreadable. The trainee set Larik down gently. "He's breathing, he'll be fine," the human said, then turned back into the storm without waiting for a reply. Harlan crouched beside the gasping cadet. "Do you get it now?" Larik looked at him through blurry vision. "They weren't exaggerating." "Nope." Larik swallowed, throat raw. "You train in lethal conditions. For fun." Harlan's face twitched in what might have been a smile. "For survival. The fun just keeps us going." Later that evening, alone in the sterilized confines of the medbay, Larik composed a message to his elder brother back home on Tularis Prime. He hesitated before starting, unsure how to put what he'd seen into words. Finally, he settled on something simple, something true. "They are not fearless," he wrote, "but they train until fear obeys them." He paused, stared at the blinking cursor, then added, "And if war ever comes to their doorstep, may the stars have mercy on us." Because they won't. The first thing Commander Veleth noticed was the silence, not the absence of noise. There were sounds, certainly. The distant crackle of heat vents releasing pressure beneath the surface, the low hum of automated beacons tracking atmospheric shifts, the occasional guttural calls of native avians circling overhead like dark whispers. But there was no chatter, no boasting, no idle bravado. The human squad before him was utterly still, their eyes fixed on the jagged ridge ahead. He had commanded soldiers from 27 species. He knew the scent of courage and the stench of fear. Yet these humans exuded something different entirely, concentration so dense it felt like pressure in the air, as though their restraint wasn't weakness, but the tensile readiness of a coiled spring. "This is Black Rock Prime," said Major Reyes, a Terran officer barely taller than Veleth's shoulder, but carrying herself like a living weapon. "Gravity's at 1.4 standard. The crust isn't stable. Quakes are common. Magma breaches without warning. Air's hot, thin, and corrosive on bad days. Today's a bad day." Veleth's 3 arms adjusted the fittings of his respiration armor. "And this is where you train?" he asked, making no effort to mask the disbelief. Reyes gave him a flat look. "This is where we filter out the ones who hesitate." Before Veleth could reply, the comms chimed. A warning blinked into his retinal HUD. "Seismic activity detected. Subsurface shift imminent." The humans moved instantly, not to retreat but to descend. They dropped over the ridge like shadows into the molten haze below, feet nimble on unstable rock, rifles secured across backs, mouths set in firm, wordless determination. Veleth hesitated only a moment before following, his enhanced musculature compensating for the hostile terrain. He was no rookie. He had seen real battle. He had survived the Carthan Expanse and the siege of Vixar Run, but this felt different. The squad spread out, covering ground with the fluidity of predators in familiar territory. They didn't look at the sky, didn't speak, didn't even check their senses. Their instincts were tuned to something deeper, something Veleth couldn't quite grasp. Their discipline didn't feel imposed, it radiated from within. Halfway down the slope, The ground trembled beneath them. A burst of flame shot up 30 meters away, turning a jagged rock spire to glass. One of the soldiers, call sign Vega, barely flinched, adjusting her gait mid-stride and vaulting over a fresh fissure without breaking pace. Veleth opened a private channel. "Your sensors must be predicting these eruptions." Reyes's voice crackled in his ear. "No time. We read the rock patterns. Feel the shifts in our knees. You train long enough on a death world, you start thinking like one." The idea disturbed him. Becoming attuned to death, to chaos, to unpredictability, that was a trait of prey animals trying to survive a predatory ecosystem. But humans didn't merely survive this world, they thrived in it. They adapted not by escaping danger, but by memorizing its rhythm. Then came the quake. It began with a low groan beneath their boots, followed by a sickening lurch. The earth split open just meters ahead, sending plasma-red light into the dark. Vega stumbled, misjudging the rupture. She slid downward, vanishing behind a plume of sulphurous steam. Veleth moved instinctively, activating his magnetic boots, but Reyes had already sprinted past him. She didn't shout for help. She didn't pause to assess. She leapt into the ash cloud without hesitation. Seconds passed. The tremor subsided. Veleth crept forward, coughing against the heat and fumes, expecting the worst. Reyes emerged, dragging Vega by the arm, both coughing but alive. Vega's leg armor had melted in places. Her skin blistered where exposed. Yet her expression wasn't pained. It was irritated, angry at her own mistake, not the injury. Reyes laid her down and pulled out a stim injector, her hands moving with detached precision. "No evac?" Veleth asked, shocked. "She's not dead," Reyes replied. "She finishes the descent or washes out." Veleth stared. She could die. Reyes finally turned to him, eyes narrow. "We all could. That's the point." They pressed on. At the base of the descent, the ground stabilized into a basin of obsidian plates, still steaming from past eruptions. It looked like a graveyard for worlds. Here, Reyes finally called a halt. "Hydrate. Evaluate your gear. You've got 3 minutes." Vega sat upright, helmet off, her face flushed and grimy. Her left eye was bloodshot and she grimaced with each breath. Veleth knelt beside her. "You should rest," he offered. "Let the medbot evaluate." She laughed, not loudly, not mockingly, just enough to send a tremor of unease down his spine. "You really don't get it," she said. "This isn't a war game, this is what we are. The war is just where we show it." Veleth looked around at the squad, stoic, alert, every one of them scraped or bruised or scorched. None of them looked at Vega with pity. They looked at her with respect. He stood and looked back up the ridge they'd just conquered. The path was blackened, cratered, and still hissing with heat. No sane species would come here for anything but punishment or exile, but the humans came for refinement. Reyes called out again. "Form up, final push to the extraction site. Quakes or not, we finish the route." They rose as one, Vega limping. But determined, the others already falling into formation. Veleth followed them into the rising smoke, one thought echoing through his mind like a warning. These creatures don't fear death worlds because they were forged inside one. Larik had never seen a real battlefield before, not one made by humans. He stood at the edge of what used to be an outpost, now nothing but a jagged scar gouged into the rock of a once thriving colony hub. The sky above boiled with residual electromagnetic interference, its storm glow still pulsing violet hours after the orbital bombardment. Charred equipment, half-melted drones, and the occasional twisted limb jutted from the soot-blackened soil like remnants of a broken dream. And the humans were already rebuilding. Not with machines, not with drones or remote tech. With their own hands. He watched Sergeant Harlan haul a support beam off a half-buried transport, dust and ash caking his face. His uniform was tattered, blood dried on his temple, but his eyes burned with purpose. Beside him, Vega, still limping from the Blackrock exercise, coordinated survivors, her voice hoarse but unwavering. Larik approached cautiously, his translator, barely functioning through the static-choked air. "You're not evacuating?" he asked. Harlan didn't look up. Evacs for people with a rear line. "But the enemy is coming back," Vega cut in. "So we stay." Larik's Throat tightened. Why? Harlan finally paused, turning to face him. Because if we run, they don't just take this rock. They take what we let them. Territory's not just ground, it's message. Vega handed a charred data core to a medic who nodded silently and moved on. The message here is simple. You can burn us, break us, bury us, but we'll still dig. Our way out and stand on your doorstep. Larik's mandibles flexed involuntarily. That's not strategy, that's suicide. No, Harlan replied, stepping closer, the space between them dense with heat and grit. It's humanity. Before Larik could reply, the perimeter alert wailed, a low pulsing dirge that crawled up his spine. From the eastern horizon, where the canyon walls parted like a maw, movement stirred, silhouettes too many to count, marching with insectoid precision. Gleaming armor caught the firelight, war forms, not recon drones, not scouts, a full armored spearhead. The enemy had returned. Within moments, chaos became command. Human survivors who moments ago were sorting wreckage now moved like a single body, rifles checked, cover points retaken. No one shouted, no one panicked. They simply acted. Get to cover, Vega ordered Larik, dragging a fresh power cell into a mounted turret half buried in rubble. This isn't your fight. It wasn't supposed to be yours either, he snapped, anger rising, not at her but at the realization clawing at his chest. They weren't pretending to be fearless. They chose this. A sudden detonation split the field. The first wave had begun. Larik scrambled into a depression beside a shattered communications relay, his fingers trembling as he activated his wrist cam. He had to record this. His people, no, the galaxy, needed to see it. 3 humans charged past his position, moving through gunfire and shrapnel like they were born in it. One took a blast to the shoulder and stumbled. The second dragged him. Behind cover, blood soaking their gear. The third didn't stop. He vaulted a barrier and drove a blade into the soft underjoint of an enemy exosuit, pulling the trigger on a sidearm before his boots even hit the ground again. They were outnumbered. Outgunned, surrounded, but they were not outmatched. The enemy formation began to slow. Not because their numbers thinned, no, because they hesitated. Because the humans were not falling back. They were advancing. From his position, Larik watched Reyes emerge from a concealed alcove, a field-mounted railgun balanced on her back, like a predator's spine. She took 2 steps forward, dropped to one knee and fired. The sound didn't echo, it devoured sound. The blast punched through the front line of enemy suits like they were made of paper. The survivors tried to regroup, but the humans had found momentum, and nothing was more dangerous than Terrans who believed they had a chance. Vega limped her way to the high ground, yanking a fusion cutter free and carving through enemy armor. With wild, calculated fury, Harlan provided cover from below, every round from his rifle an extension of his will. Even wounded, he moved with terrifying intent. No missed shots, no wasted motion. Larik's wrist unit sparked, nearly dead. He reached to disconnect it when something heavy landed behind him. He turned and froze. An enemy warform nearly 3 meters tall loomed above, dual energy blades charging with a high-pitched whine. Its segmented eyes locked onto him, recognizing he was not human, not combat-rated and vulnerable. It raised its arm. Larik thought of his homeworld, of safety, reason, calculation, and realized none of it had prepared him for this. Before the strike fell, a blur of motion crashed into the warform. Vega. She tackled it with a scream that was half pain, half defiance, her blade already in motion. The warform swatted her aside, but not before she sliced through its control module. Sparks flew as it staggered. Larik didn't think. He lunged forward and drove his own utility blade into the exposed junction Vega had opened. The machine collapsed. He dropped beside her, panting. She was bleeding again. He reached for a med pack, his hands slick. "Why?" he whispered. "Why? Save me." Vega looked at him, eyes glassy but focused. "Because if you survive, maybe your people will stop thinking we're savages and start listening." "To what?" She smiled faintly. "To the reason Earth is called a death world." The tide of battle turned in slow, vicious increments. What should have been a slaughter became a standstill. Then, impossibly, it became a rout. By the time reinforcements arrived from the Terran fleet, the enemy was already withdrawing. The outpost was rubble. Human casualties were high, but they had held. Later, as medical teams moved among the wounded and engineers re-established contact with orbit, Larik sat beside a fire pit made from shattered plating. Reyes approached, limping from a shrapnel wound but otherwise intact. "You recorded it all, didn't you?" He nodded. "Good. Send it. Let them see what we are. Let them see why Earth forged us like this." He looked up. "And if they misunderstand? If they see this as madness?" Reyes's gaze burned. "Then they're not ready. But if they do understand, they'll know one truth." "What truth?" She crouched beside him, her voice low. "That when the galaxy burns, you want humans standing in the fire, because we're the only ones who learned how to dance in it." Larik sent the transmission that night. No embellishments, no dramatic music or narration, just raw footage, just truth. Within days, it spread to every corner of the Galactic Accord, and in the silent meeting halls of empires and coalitions, diplomats and strategists watched, and for the first time they understood. The real shockwave wasn't the war, it was us.